All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our live stream. Today's topic is the IT Manager's Guide to Google Cloud Transformation. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam. I'm the head of marketing here at Cloud Institute. And if you're not familiar with Cloud Institute, we're a training and coaching company that equips IT teams to confidently deliver on IT projects. We offer personalized coaching with cloud experts and hands-on project-based training to help you with your live projects. And I'm happy today to introduce one of those cloud experts, our cloud leader, Zaki Medina. Let me bring him in there. Hi, Zaki. He'll be presenting today. Zaki is an expert instructor and cloud coach who has coached thousands of aspiring data scientists. Let's bring up his bio here so you can see what I'm talking about. So before I turn it over to Zaki, I want to encourage you to ask questions in the comments, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Also, the recording will be available here on this LinkedIn event page immediately afterwards. If you'd like a copy of the slide deck, just leave us a comment, and we'll connect and get that over to you as well. We'll try to keep this to around 30 minutes. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Zaki. Zaki, take it away.
Thank you so much, Peter. Hope everyone can hear me. Thank you again for joining today. I want to jump in and really look at, so we have a kind of a packed schedule. When we were thinking about, hey, there's a lot of content around cloud fundamentals, but not much around the journey to cloud, right? What does that migration journey look like? What do we need to consider when we're executing a successful migration to Google Cloud, right? So I'll be specific to Google Cloud, but we could apply this to other cloud vendors as well. And the objective here is really to look at the migration. So we're not going to look at things like cloud adoption, business case, cloud strategy, modernization strategy, things like that. And if those are topics that are of interest to you, feel free to add those in the chat. Maybe those could be future webinar topics. Our focus is really going to be around cloud, right? And when we talk about, each cloud vendor actually has their own view on how you should migrate to cloud, right? And there is documentation. There are some guided, walkthroughs around migrations to either AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. The process is pretty much fairly similar across all three. And what I've found is, having a defined migration journey is very useful. And it also helps people, our teams, and our processes to be, to be aligned to ensure that we have a successful migration. So our focus is again on Google Cloud. And as I mentioned, you could apply this to other areas. So, if I think about Google Cloud migration journey, you could think about it into these four key sort of phases, right? You have assess, plan, migrate, and optimize. So, and then what does this mean? So basically, assess is, very simply, we're discovering your IT estate and workloads and any additional information that you can use to help define that migration type and effort, right? Plan sort of like, hey, which workloads are we going to migrate first? And how are we going to migrate? How are we going to schedule those migrations? So we look at sort of the scheduling, the migration order, things of that nature. And then migration, the actual execution, right? So now we're moving workloads using our defined migration paths. And there's a few ways to do this, and we'll go through a couple of these. Again, the goal of this very short 30-minute live stream today is just to give an overview of flavor, right? Again, very interested if you guys want us to deep dive into any of these topics in the future as well. And then finally, a step that's often missed is the optimize step, right? Making efficiency gains through the performance tweaks and modernization that's available to us through Google Cloud's managed services. So we'll look at what each of these phases entail. And again, I really encourage everyone to sort of look at, and participate and provide some questions and Q&As. We'll have some time, hopefully, at the end to go through that. So let's start with assess, right? So this is sort of the first step. If you think about every, migration journey, doesn't matter where you are. This is basically where we do discovery and assessing what we have discovered in workloads. And the question around what are we discovering? Well, we're discovering our IT assets. I would consider these assets as sort of precursors to identifying workloads that we have. Larger organizations that I've worked with in the past, have something called a CMDB, a configuration management database, right? It's basically, it just houses a historical record of all the IT assets, right? So, and if you're like me, Murphy's Law comes in. A lot of these assets are often out of date, and we have to go in and make some manual updates before we consider it a source of truth. So if you're an IT manager or a business application owner, you're probably, or the person really tasked with sort of leading this charge, right? Being responsible for the business unit, right? That consumes that application. This is sort of where, I would engage yourself or other application owners in this to help you with that discovery. And part of that discovery is, what tools could we use today right off the bat to help with that discovery process, right? And so just a quick FYI, Google has a very, interesting approach to automated discovery and assessment. They actually acquired a company called Stratazone in 2020, and this becomes sort of Google's answer to performing automated discovery and assessment for your IT assets, right? So basically all Stratazone is, it's just a virtual appliance, and then you install in your data center. And again, it doesn't matter where your organization sits across the globe or how segmented your network is, you may have to install something called a Strata Probe into all of these, and then Stratazone aggregates all of this. So, Strata Probe is the data collector, and then it's a nice little GUI, and it sends all that information back to the Google Cloud, where it's all analyzed and made available through the Stratazone portal, right? And this is like a separate portal to Google Cloud for a bit more integrated experience. And in that Stratazone portal, we can sort of group our servers under an application, give them a name if we want to rename them, and reflect probably what type of application workload they're doing, right? Again, one thing nice about Stratazone is it gives us several automated reports, and it even gives us Google Cloud cost model reports, so we can get the cost of, hey, what's one of our servers going to cost? What's this application group, this data center, or this asset, and so on. So it's not a very complicated tool to install and configure, but there are guides to help you with it. Google will, depending on your organization, support with Google. They could assign you a customer engineer, a CE, to help you, or you may have a Google Cloud partner with some integrated migration specialization. They'll be able to help you with this, right? So that's basically what we're looking at. So all of these tools are great. There's also some built-in tools, like Google has Google's, migrate to containers, right? This is basically, it performs a container fit assessment against your workloads. So it gives you sort of a container fit report, and that report sort of issues, details any issues that you may have before migration of those containers, right? So it gives you sort of like a rating, like a score, right? The scoring sort of ranges from excellent fit to needs major work, or no fit and insufficient data, right? Again, so this is something, as you go through it, the tool will give you recommendations on what to do. For some of you that are doing more lift and shift to Google Compute Engine, this is very useful because it can provide you with insights in areas that you want to fix pre or post migration. So uniquely, this tool can sort of help you with automated containerization of your VMs as you migrate into GKE or GKE Autopilot or Cloud Run, and so on. So and then the next two tools are sort of, they're third-party products by Cast Software. The first software is called Cast Highlight. And what Cast Highlight does is it provides cloud readiness insights for assessing the workloads against hundreds of known cloud migration patterns. It provides you with effort estimates, blockers, container fit insights, and a dependency map, right? And then it overlays all of that with recommendations for each of that, kind of gives you like this Gartner style, type of graphic, and so on. And so and the terms are basically rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, and retire, right? So it's a very nice little way. Cast Highlight also does a software composition analysis where it looks at, the details of your open source software, any security vulnerabilities, and sort of groups them as well, right? And so on. And then finally, there's Cast Imaging, right? And Cast Imaging is, their tagline is, we are the Google Maps of your architecture, right? So Cast Imaging gives you the next level of detail that Highlight doesn't, right? From database structures and code components to interdependencies, all the way down to sort of low levels, like an individual DLL file, right? So cast imaging presents all of that detail in a nice interactive visual that cast calls the architecture blueprints. Again, not calling out these tools. I was given leeway to suggest my favorite tools here. Again, there are third-party tools out there, really great ones. These are the ones I'm familiar with to a large part. So again, having the right tools helps. I would say Stratazone is probably your best bet uh, for 90% of all workloads. And so that's awesome. So now that we know we have done discovery on our IT assets, on our workloads. Now what, right? So the question is, workload categorization. Like all workloads are not treated equal, right? And all workloads have a shelf life, no matter how critical they are to an organization. So typically, your organization may have a database of all these workloads, right, somewhere. Sometimes this is referred to as an application portfolio management, an APM. This comes in the form of a dedicated tool, and it's likely an extension of your CMDB tool, right? An example of this is ServiceNow offers exactly this kind of extension as well. That's the one I use in my environment. And then so on. So basically, what APMs will do is they will hold data like it will correlate all the IT assets, your servers, storage, that is in use by that particular workload. And also it'll give you the end user usage, whether it's by a specific business unit, a location, or a department. And it can even break down all of that through incidents or tickets that are generated over time. And then those tickets and incidents will have a categorization or priority or another unit of measure and so on. So you'll be able to view all of that in your APM, right? So APM done properly can highlight, your costly workloads that you're not utilizing, and then you can make strategic decisions about whether you keep it or not, right? So typically you'll either have your enterprise will have an APM tool or an extension in your CMDB that you can rely on, right? As an example. Now, one of the questions I get is, hey, once I have that list of workloads, how do I categorize them, right? And how do I categorize them, let's say, in order of importance to the business, right? Because think about it. After all, a single server with only a few dependencies and a few outbound HTTPS connections might appear like a potential first mover of your migration wave until you realize the server is part of your payroll system. So now it's deemed critical. So you have to be careful, right? Oftentimes, when we do categorizing workloads, I run like a simple exercise, right? And this exercise is looking, I work with business and technical application workload owners, and there's a simple quadrant. We're just walking through this. Again, anyone can take this as an example. And basically, I do an interview with them, with these application owners, workload owners, and I ask them to categorize each application or workload that they're responsible based on its criticality and value to the organization, right? So an example here would be, on the low value, non-critical, maybe the HR app as an example. But then at the top right, you have the e-commerce platform, right? Like that's what's generating sales. It's very important, and so on. Also in that critical space is payroll, right? So making sure payroll is running. So sales and payroll, and then high value would be customer feedback app as an example. So now to understand all of these, what is high value and critical versus what is low value and non-critical, you could ask yourself a series of questions, right? Like, to define a workload as critical, some of the questions would be, does the business and the technical application owners, what percentage of your total customers interact with and transact with the workload? Is there a significant number of employees interact with the workload? Is that workload or data dependent on other critical workloads? Fourth, is it strategic to your organization in terms of revenue and market share? And then fourth, the last one is always downtime, right? When downtime happens on this workload, what is the impact? Whether it be financial, be social, right? So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's just something to start thinking about and building. So when you've answered a bunch of these questions, you can then start to map out, after these series of application interviews, map out all these different workloads in this quadrant, and then sort of look at, okay, now how do I go and assess the type of migration that we want? So that's where we will sort of look at, okay, what, again, one quick thing to note here is that, let's say you have a situation in your organization where we have a compelling event about to happen. Maybe it's a contract renewal on my data center facility, or maybe the shareholders were promised by the CEO to be in the cloud by a certain time. These types of things could change the approach to your migration approach, right? So just think about that as an example. I want to call that out because every organization has different unique factors, right? So to figure this out, you kind of need to perform two steps, right? Step one is assign a migration complexity or effort rating to each workload. And the scale I'm demonstrating here is just a three-level scale, three-tier scale: simple, medium, or complex. And then step two is to identify if the workload competitively differentiates you, right? As an example. So using these data points that you've uncovered in your automated discovery tool, right, upfront, and your application interviews to assess each workload, you now be able to build out this criteria, right? So an example would be, if any of these criteria for a medium or complex is met, that is the label you give that workload, right? Then you move on to the next, right? So questions you'd ask is, hey, is discovery supported with automated tooling? Is the OS supported by migration tooling? Do I need third-party, license changes and so on? Do I need, external dependencies like an external storage or a database or another component? So all of these will basically, we'll end up in a situation where we've classified all of these, right? And once you classify these workloads, the next step is to assign whether it's a competitive differentiator or a commodity, right? So an example workload will be HR app, right? Your HR app, again, does that stand out against your competitors? And is that the reason your customers choose you? Probably not. Therefore, that's a commodity, and it should be replaced with a SaaS product, right? So that's an example of you going back and having a discussion with application owners, department heads that, hey, this is not central to our business. We don't need that. And then likewise, if you think about the customer feedback app, while the data within it holds much value to the business, the feedback app itself doesn't differentiate you as your competitor. May use the same, right? So again, SaaS product. And then finally, the e-commerce platform. However, probably differentiates you, and at least it can. So maybe that's something you need to think about and put that as a check mark, right? That's sort of the workload that you want to work on. So all of these will basically help us sort of understand what's the low-hanging fruit, or sometimes we call them first movers, right? Which is basically, you're undertaking a migration to Google Cloud, and that's going to be a workload or several workloads. You want to know which one's going first, which are the first movers, and these are based on some of, there's different approaches to this, right? So we can think about, again, maybe the best approach is to identify the simplest workloads first to move, and typically these simple workloads will have the following characteristics, right? There'll be, these low-hanging fruit there'll be simple workloads as per the criteria before. They won't be business critical, preferably non-production. They're managed by central teams. They're not edge cases or outliers, right? Meaning they're not unique in terms of OS, licensing, tech stack, architecture. And probably this is a good time. They present a good learning opportunity as we go and migrate for the first time into Google Cloud, right? And cut our teeth into that. And then the workload's business owner is supportive of the migration. It's very important. And then finally, it does not contain vast amounts of data, and so on. And then we can afford the cutover window. That means we can incur some scheduled downtime, and it's not going to have a huge impact, right? So again, this is all, part of what we do, right? We identify the workloads across your organization's business units that are typically a mix of different complexities and use cases. And where this sort of differs is use the low-hanging fruit to learn lessons that might be unique to your business, right? Because every business I've seen, even though I've done a few Google Cloud migrations, even in the same industry, it's like the same, it's very different for each organization. So you get those little learnings as well, right? So, and so on. And then finally, looking at sort of the high priority, right? Like, what's the most urgent need? Maybe we have other constraints, as I mentioned, right? Maybe it's scaling, availability, end of life hardware, or a contract that's ending, right? So those are some of the things you want to consider. And so, again, in the assess phase, as I mentioned, very simply to summarize, you deploy the strata zone to discover your data center servers. You engage your application owners early to reduce likely delays later on. Categorize your workloads with the criteria, right? You define each workload's migration approach, and then you define your first mover criteria, and then agree with your first movers, right? So that's sort of the big step. And I know I'm double clicking into this a bit more, but this is sort of very high level. Then we jump into the planning, right? The planning, again, won't cover much of it. The plan phase is more about some of the things that you should think about, right, when you're planning, such as tools and prerequisites, right? So, once you have a good understanding of your workloads and the migration paths, you need to evaluate and select, install, and configure the migration tools you require to get your workloads into the Google Cloud, right? As an example. So like what kind of tools do I need? Do we currently have them? What's the tools cost and ease of procuring it? And does the tool vendor is on our preferred list? Where does the tool need to be deployed? How many required instances? How is data being transferred to Google Cloud? What's the encryption that's used? Does the tool require any configuration? These are all wonderful questions we would love to ask as a result. So one thing I do want to mention about this is, as you build this out, and we'll double click into the migration landing zone as an example, right? And in the next slide. But I just want to talk briefly about communication engagement, right? So earlier we informed the organization, hey, we're going to move to the Google Cloud. It's going to be better for everyone, right? So communication is something that has to be very clear: what is happening, when it's happening, why it's happening, who the stakeholders are, the calls to action. And then, this is something that often gets missed. So just want to make sure we cover that. The next piece is around migration wave grouping and scheduling. Basically, what the term migration wave means, it's just a collection of workloads that are going to be migrated in a single 2-week migration sprint, or in a single weekend, whatever you define as that wave to be, right? So you want to group your workloads into waves within the plan phase. The first wave is simple. It's your first movers per your criteria. Subsequent waves would be grouped based on your workload category and the migration and so on. And then finally, as you implement your organizational readiness plan, these are plans about your cloud operating model, your learning path, right, for your team, your security controls, your governance controls, things of that nature. And then obviously you probably want to start with a pilot migration, use the pilot to test the end-to-end migration and rollback process if required. And I recommend piloting with a new VM created specifically for testing. And you should have just an OS and then delete the VM once you're done, right? So this is sort of the high level of that. Now, I want to double click quickly into the landing zone. Again, this is a huge topic, but when you're planning out, you'll need to design and deploy your Google Cloud foundations and your migration landing zone. Basically, your Google Cloud foundations are your Google Cloud products and services. This is on which you will build and deploy your workloads, right? And then, example would be things like identity access management and your Google Cloud organization hierarchy. And then you also want to make sure that your migration builds on that. And then expanding on the migration landing zone, it's the configuration of the Google Cloud products and services that form the location where you will move the VMs during the cutover process, right? So, and 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 so on. So that's where you will deploy, you'll deploy your migration tooling. You may need a virtual appliance deployed at Google Cloud to control the migration process. All of these are part of your migration landing zone, right? So, you can basically configure a Google Cloud project for migrate for compute engine as an example, and and then you can basically use the Google target projects where the migrated VMs will reside as an example. The next step is sort of the migration side. This is the actual migration. again, migration will depend on where you are in the migration life cycle. Typically, you will start with your migration tools. These will be a mix of server migration tools. Google has a few, right? There's Migrate for Compute Engine, M4CE, which is basically a virtual appliance that enables you to replicate a server from source to location. It's your, on-premise, so you can move your on-premise data centers to Google Cloud, and you can do this. It doesn't need an agent installed on each server, and you'll have a migration connector and so on. And then there's a few other tools. There's also VMware's hybrid cloud extension, HCX. And then basically this is a VMware as a service that's running Google Cloud. HCX offers zero downtime migrations through vMotion, and it has high throughput, so it's working through layer 2. It's very, offline and bulk migrations are also possible. And then there's a few. HCX kind of requires cloud interconnect where you need a VPN access. There's also options for custom image imports where you could just bring your own license or bring your own subscription scenarios, right? You have standard template VM images for on-premise deployments. You can import those into Google Cloud. And then there's container migration tools, various ones of those. And there's database migration tools like DMS, which is Database Migration Service. If you want to use, DMS to help you DB migrate to your Google Cloud SQL, right? It supports that. It supports managed instances of MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, or Oracle, and so on. And then sort of you look at feedback loops, right? I'm sure you all know what feedback loops are. When you're running many different development and operation frameworks like Site Reliability Engineer, SRE, as a mechanism, you want to improve and increase performance, have formalized feedback. As I mentioned, migration waves, I typically use 2-week sprints to do those. And you basically work with the Scrum Master and make sure, hey, what were the lessons learned and so on. And then finally, once the migration is done, you want to hand it over, right? It's your business as usual or BAU teams who pick up the operational side and so on. So that's sort of the migration piece to that. This is just an example of a migrate to container workflow. As I mentioned, this just starts creating a processing cluster from which the migrate to container components can be run as an example, right? Just to show you what it looks like. And then finally, our last step is optimize, right? In optimize, again, the term of optimize, often when you hear about it, you think, hey, is it cost reduction? It's not just that. It's also about right-sizing your servers to smaller instance types to meet service performance needs without paying more for CPU and RAM, right? So Google Cloud migration journey, the optimize phase has a huge scope, right? You can think about, and typically you treat this, a lot of the organizations I've spent, they adopt quality standards, right? They use the ISO, IEC 25000 series, right? ISO is just a product quality model. It divides quality into these 8 characteristics of functional suitability, performance efficiency, compatibility, usability, reliability, security, maintainability, and portability. Basically, one quick way of looking at this is, hey, what does that mean? Basically, you start yourself by asking yourself some simple questions. Let's say we ask ourselves, hey, can my infrastructure and core components scale vertically or horizontally? Or does it support rolling back without manual intervention? Great. What's the answer to that? Well, likely answer would be today, no. Not every infrastructure can scale horizontally, and undoing infrastructure change requires manual intervention. Great. As I'm moving to the cloud, what should my new requirements be? Maybe I want to increase the XYZ availability of a specific component. Maybe I want to increase infrastructure automation. Great. Now I have created a goal or an SLA where I want to provide 99.9% or 4 nines, 5 nines, whatever it is for that XYZ component, right? This is just a quick way of showcasing that. And this is sort of a big slide just to show how everything is pulled together here. Again, you do your discovery assessment, you plan your waves, and then you do each wave, with 2-week sprints and so on. Again, the goal here is to do this in a fashion that's really helpful. So with that, I'll pass it off to um, Peter here. If there's any questions, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, and thanks so much for that presentation. That was fantastic, and I'm sure helpful to a lot of people that are going through the Google Cloud transformation or looking forward to it. Did have a couple of questions come in, so let's take a look at those. One that we got here is what kind of support and resources are available from Google and the wider community to assist with a successful cloud migration?
That's a really great question. Actually, Google has, if you click on Google's documentation, which is cloud.google.com/architecture/migration to GCP, you'll see there's a bunch of links there that will give you access to resources at various stages of your journey. And then there's also self-service resources, right, that you can look up within that same link. So,
all right, very good. Another one here is how can I ensure ongoing security and compliance of my organization's data and applications after migrating to Google Cloud?
so typically when you have, your ongoing security and compliance, I mean, right at the beginning of the assess stage, you would be in the plan stage, you would be looking at what is your security controls, what are your, what security or compliance regime you're following. Google Cloud already, from a large part, already checks the boxes for NIST and other compliance frameworks and risk management frameworks. So you could download those specific libraries and blueprints from Google Cloud to assist you working with your governance folks, your security teams, and ensuring, hey, this is how Google Cloud does it. Here's the documentation. Here's how we check box all of these things. So that's probably the best place to start.
Very cool. Just wanted to show this comment too from Barry watching on LinkedIn. He said, excellent presentation. Thanks as always for the practical guidance and the real world experience. So love to see those kinds of comments as well. So thanks for watching. Just want to let you know a couple of things now before we let you go. As you see up on the screen here, for a limited time, our GCP Bootcamp is on sale for 50% off. This bootcamp will prepare you to earn the 3 most in-demand GCP certifications: the Cloud Digital Leader, Associate Cloud Engineer, and Professional Cloud Architect. So you also get 1 hour of one-on-one coaching with a GCP expert, plus access to our self-paced courses and over 100 hands-on GCP labs. And in addition, for anyone watching this who purchases the bootcamp, and from seeing the webinar, we're offering a bonus coaching session as well. So you get to send an email to sales@cloudinstitute.io for more details on how you can receive that extra coaching session along with the bootcamp there. Zach, before we let you go, any final closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize the importance of coaching, right? Anyone that's starting out their cloud career, I really encourage all the listeners serious about advancing their career to reach out and get that one-on-one mentorship, because it makes a huge difference, right? And next week, April 27th, I'll be live streaming more about this topic on the use cases of cloud coaching. Hope everyone can join us again next week. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And send us a message if you want to be notified of those upcoming events, and we can add you to our list. Zach will be hosting 5 more free trainings over the coming months. So please do stay tuned. Thank you so much for presenting today. We appreciate that. Thank you to all of our listeners and viewers, both live and those that are watching in the future on recordings. Thank you as well. Thanks for your time and attention. Let us know if you have any questions or feedback. We're happy to engage with you guys in the comments. And our next event, as he said, is next Tuesday, April 25th at noon U.S. Eastern Time. Zach will be back to present an hour-long webinar on becoming a Google Cloud Digital Leader. Hope you can join us then, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.